Hi, I'm back. It's Pat Stewart, and welcome to the Goat Keeping School. Today we're going to be talking about fencing in the Nigerian dwarf goat. The number one problem that people have with goats is you can't keep them in, so they say. I don't have that much problem keeping them in, as long as I do my job. I don't let my goats free range all over my garden, all over my yard. They live within a pastured space. Here you can see a picture. I don't have a pretty fence line like a lot of people have. If you want to put up a split rail fence, you're welcome to do that. Um, I use a wonderful fencing called a hinge lock. That's what it was called 20 years ago. It's called all sorts of different things now. But basically, what it is a series of horizontal wires that are a heavy gauge wire. And then the verticals come up and wrap around the horizontals. There's a loop and then an extension. And what that allows is that when the fence gets brought down because a tree falls on it, or because age just made it sag because it wasn't tight enough, you can pull it up back into place and it will stay there. It's expensive, but mine has the 30-year guarantee. So most farms aren't 30 years old. Mine's already 20 years old, and I don't plan on going anywhere with the goats anytime soon. So we may have to replace it, but it's still in very good shape. You can find woven wire and welded wire at Tractor Supply in your feed stores. I recommend a woven wire, not a welded wire fence. You can use welded wire in a pinch, but what happens is when that fence crosses and it's welded, that also weakens the fence. So as the goats pound into it, it breaks off, and then next thing you know, you've got somebody impaled with a piece of fence line. Woven wire, it's actually woven in and much more flexible. They will still push it apart, so that's something to think about. Another way to go is livestock panels. Excuse me. Livestock panels are heavy duty, and they come in different sizes. Most of them are 16 feet long, but they can be in hog panel size, which is about 3.5 feet high, or a regular cattle panel, which is just shy of 5 feet high. Cattle panels have their horizontals at the same height all the way along. And the bottom section is just wide enough that a goat kid from a Nigerian can run in and out like crazy. They can have a really nice little slalom course. So if you're going to use cattle panels, line the bottom with some woven wire or even some chicken wire. You can even use snow fence, whatever you have to keep them from going in and out. That will also keep varmints from coming in. I like to use combo panels. Combo panels are meant specifically to deal with the issue of lambs and kids. The bottom panels the openings in the bottom are gradated. They're usually about 2 inches tall at the bottom, and they get wider as they go on up, so that eventually they're 5 by 5 inches. Those are such a heavy gauge wire, they're very difficult to get to break and bend. If they do get bent, say something falls on them, or they get bowed out, my old vet actually gave me the tip was to lay them down and use a bucket from a tractor and push it back down, leave it on there for a while, and that will give the fence some more of its original shape. It will always be weaker than it was, but it's an extraordinary thing that can actually bend a cattle panel. It's not something a goat usually does. A cow or a horse could do it, but not a Nigerian dwarf goat. So you've got your cattle panels, you've got your regular fencing. Chicken wire fencing is not a great solution if that's your only fencing, because it is so fragile. And when it breaks, it can really scratch like crazy. So I would use it, again, to keep the kids in, but don't try to use it to keep your adults in. Again, a snow fence is a good temporary battle, or a temporary barrier, but a goat can eat right through that. This year we had to use some temporary panels, and our goats were getting out because they were not combo panels. So we lined the inside with snow fence, and we came back the next morning and the snow fence was down. the kids were all running loose again. It's because the mamas had come through and they'd bitten through the top so that they could actually bring that whole plastic snow fence down and the kids could escape. What we did was bring it up tighter, tighten a couple places using wire. We usually use the farmer's best friend baling twine. This time we used wire, and they couldn't bite through it, and it lasted much longer. So it gave us the chance to use the livestock panels for temporary fencing and not worry about having to do a serious upgrade. We just happen to have some plastic snow fencing around. Lots of people want to rely on electric fence, and I love electric fence, but I would not recommend using it as your main barrier, okay? Unless you can do high tensile, New Zealand high tensile fencing, and have 7 to 9 wires, and they have to be tight and hot all the time. Those goat kids will get out. Now, what is high tensile fencing? Here's a picture. It is movable. Generally, it's not moved. Generally, you hire somebody to come in and set it. Here in New England, at least. I'm sure out in the West, they do it themselves. But the tension on it is so tight that it can cut if an animal if it does not break away. It's designed to break away. I have seen situations, though, where it did not break away, and the animals got caught and continually got zapped with electric. That type of fencing usually uses a low amperage, high wattage fencing, or low wattage, high amperage fencing. You definitely want a low impedance fence. Low impedance means that it's not going to get killed by hitting wet weeds all the time. The weeds are going to grow up. Goats are not going to go eat near the electric fence. So a low impedance fence can handle being wet with grass much better than a high impedance fence can handle. So you want a low impedance fence line. You want to keep it tight. And if I needed to rely on electric fence, I would use what's called an electronet. And here's a picture of it. Electronet is actually a woven series of both conductive and non-conductive wires and plastics, so that it actually is a web that's 150 feet long. Every 10 feet is a fiberglass post. So you can put it over water. You can put it among rocks. It will go up over things. It's a wonderful tool. But if you don't keep it electrified, the goats will knock it down in a second. And I've actually seen the goats realize that their hooves were non-conductive. So I had a doe that somebody else owned, but she came from my herd. She learned to use her hoof to push it down from the top, and then she'd hold it down while the other goats hopped over, and then one of them would come hold it down so that she could hop over. It was still electrified the whole time. The bottom line in Electronet is not electrified. The top line is, but their hooves are non-conductive, so they could do that. If you keep it hot, the goats never learn that. Gaia had to learn it somewhere. So at some point, that fence line wasn't hot. I have also had very stupid bucks that go around and check at every insulator and get shocked at every insulator. I had one buck who did that 17 times around. He went around and got shocked at 17 different insulators. Not all of them are as smart as others. But you can use electric fence. I prefer to think of it as a way to keep other animals out than keep the Nigerian dwarf goats in. I do mainly keep my buck line hot during breeding season, which for me is from July until May. During that time, when the does are in the strongest estrus, the bucks will do whatever they can do to get out. So keeping a hot fence is a great way to keep them where you want them to be. But relying on electronet, I would still suggest that for environment control, you have an exterior fence line of some sort that is actually a physical barrier to predators coming in. Okay? Now, the one thing that I really like about livestock panels is that they can be cut down and they can be used as temporary pens. A 16-foot panel is a real pain to transport. I've done it. I've had it tied to my bumper, up over the top of my van and down to the front bumper. It was not fun, but I got it home. I've had, when we bought 20 or 30 panels at a time, we had them delivered. But I've also just brought my bolt cutters and cut them on site. And then I could get them in the back of an 8-foot trailer really easily. Even in the back of a pickup if you've got one. But if you're going to cut those end panels, do yourself a favor and avoid the heartbreak that we had here. We had cut a fence line, a livestock panel. We had not cut it as flush as we could possibly cut it. We had done an angle grinder on the edge to keep it from being so sharp, but I had a puppy run into it and kill himself. So keep those ends cut short, cut it down the middle, because that's the easiest way to use your bolt cutters, but then come back again and cut it as flush as you can to the upright, and then use an angle grinder to get to buff over the sharp edges. Otherwise, you'll cut yourself to smithereens. Don't use barbed wire. In Massachusetts, it's against the law unless it's already grandfathered. Barbed wire is just going to cut your goats to smithereens too. There are lots of other ways to keep animals controlled than cutting them. Barbed wire and fencing like that is a really good reason to give tetanus shots to your goats, because they will test the fences. And if there's one with an open end, they will cut themselves. Okay? So, when you're looking at your electrocharger, because at some point in time you're going to want to go with an electric fence, make sure that you've got enough joules. You've got enough power. Joules is Joules. And that's the actual oomph in the fence line. You may sometimes seen some of the packaging will have a little picture of a bunny rabbit and a chicken and a fox and a dog and a goat and a sheep and a hog and a horse. All of those are indicators of, especially Parmac uses that type, of what kind of animals it would keep in. I would go for the draft horse style if you've got bucks around. Otherwise, a dog strength is plenty high. If you've got bucks, though, you do need that jolt. I happen to have a draft horse too, so I need that extra fence power. But my bucks, sex drive, libido will drive them through a hot fence that isn't powerful enough. You don't want to fry them, but you definitely want to make a deterrent. And when the benefit is more than the deterrent, they will take the deterrent, avoid it to get to the breeding females. Okay? So, that brings us to the other option, which many people go to, and that's chain link fences. I do use chain link on my kennels. I don't like using it because it's diamond shaped, although I have seen some of the new Tractor Supply makes, which are actually rectangular. They are not as a problem, as problematic as the diamonds. But the diamonds, actually, the goats will climb in and then a foot will slide through and they can break their leg really easily. So keep in mind, watch and make sure that nobody gets hurt if you're going to use a chain link fence. They can't get through a chain link fence, but they can hurt themselves on them. They are excellent places for temporary enclosures. They're easy to get if you live in an urban area. You just have to be aware of them. That's all. They will keep any size goat in. I've not seen a baby goat get through them. Although the doors, the latches, the gateways will warp. So you have to be aware of that and keep some pressure on the outside so they don't warp. Okay? We've talked about latches in the housing situation, but you do need to be aware that they will test any latch they can find. And I like to see on a holding pen a top and a bottom latch. You can use either a chain or a wire between the two so you can lift them up simultaneously. But it helps support the fencing and keep it from warping because the gates will warp. If they've got a latch at the bottom, the bedding won't push out and warp the gate as much. I really do prefer the top and bottom latches. That's what I have on my kitting pens. So those are your basic issues with fencing. It's really pretty cut and dried. When you're putting up your fencing, there are a lot of different types of fence posts to look at. The ones that are plastic or fiberglass are great for electric fence, but they're not strong enough to hold up a welded wire, woven wire, or hinge lock type of fencing. So for those types of fences, or for livestock panels, you're going to have to use some other type of fence post. Cedar will last the longest of all the natural ones. Cedar's a great thing to build your shed with as well, if you can afford it. If you want to use metal fencing or metal fence posts, there are two types. It's a T-post and the U-post. I like the T-posts better myself. The U-posts are a little thinner metal, and they tend to bend, especially when the bucks are climbing them. But whichever kind you're going to use, make sure that you put the fencing on the inside of the fence post so that when they're pushing against the fence, which they will do, they're pushing the fence into the fence post, not off of it. All right? You don't want them to get caught behind it, and you don't want the fence to get stretched out that way. All right? So take a look at which type of fence post you're using, and there are different types of attachments. There are T-post fence clips, there are U-post, there are wooden fence posts. You can use trees too. In fact, when I first set up my first pasture, we used the trees. But in order to avoid the problem of the tree growing into your fence and wrapping it around, you need to put your fence up on your whatever clip you're using to attach the fence to the tree. You need to put that into a piece of wood and then screw or nail that wood into the tree. That way, as the tree grows, it will push that board out instead of enveloping it like it does with the wire. All right? So when you're thinking about your fence posts, take a look and see what kind of attachments you need to have. Just if you're going to use electric fences, take the time to train your goats to them. Don't be on the outside and ask them to come to you, because then they'll learn that you give them a shock. Go inside with some treats, bring them to the middle, turn the fence line on, and then when the treats are done, be there to comfort them when they go out and check the fence line, get shocked, then they'll come back to you for some support. They have to learn that that fence is not something they want to touch. And you don't want to be on the other side of that because that encourages them to not trust you. Okay? So that's it for the fencing at the Goat Keeping School. You can reach me at farm@hamsaxel.com if you have any questions. And I will see you at the next class. Thanks.